Hello everyone, welcome to Diagnostics by Rick. Today we will be looking at a 2003 Cadillac DeVille with a 4.6 liter North Start engine. The vehicle was originally brought into the shop for misfires and running rough and low power. The shop did some basic maintenance on it along with spark plugs and a few other things that were unrelated. Once finished, it would no longer start. The engine would crank over, but it wouldn't even make any attempt at all to start. First, I connect my Modus Edge and ID the vehicle. Checking for trouble codes is always a good place to start. I have a code for the cam sensor as well as one of the two crank sensors. Looking at scan data, it only shows a single crank sensor PID, at least in this data list, which seems to be working, but the cam sensor appears to be completely dead. I got the Pico out, but when I went to connect to the cam sensor, I found the wire at the cam sensor connector was broken. It had been repaired once before, but it had fallen apart again. I apologize, but the picture I took of this did not turn out. I'm not sure why, but it was solid black for some reason, so I don't actually have a photograph of this. After temporarily twisting the wires back together, scan data looks better, but it is still a crank no start. I cleared the codes, and neither code would return after attempting to crank it several times. I noticed that the engine did not sound normal while cranking over. This seems like an obvious compression issue, but it was somewhat erratic, so I could not tell how many cylinders were dead with just my ears. Not sure if this has anything to do with the no start, because remember the original complaint was misfires and low power. But since I already have the scope out and it's easy, I decided to go ahead and get a relative compression capture with sync. I did get a video of this so you can hear the engine and see the relative compression capture at the same time.
Okay, now we have one dead cylinder. Let's see if we can hear this with the phone. Wait for it to come back around. Maybe we have two dead cylinders. It's actually a little sporadic. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's two.
Here's the capture from the video where it clearly looks like 5 and 7 are low in compression. I am synced to cylinder number 2 and the firing order is 1, 2, 7, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. But it was not always the same. In this capture, it looks like number 6 is low and perhaps number 3 is also a little low. Then there is this capture where number 8 and maybe every other cylinder except 1 and 2 are low. Compression was indeed erratic. I could hear that much very well. I believe this was just cylinder washout. I found it odd that it moved around so much. Perhaps it does have a low compression cylinder, but I need to figure out the no start because testing compression on an engine with washed out rings is very misleading. One thing that did stand out to me is ignition timing. It looks too early to me for cranking. So I use the cursors to see where the coils are firing. Looks like spark is about 21 degrees before top dead center. While this may be fine for a running engine, it's not what I'm used to seeing during cranking. Remember the two codes we had before? One of them was for crank sensor B, and the shop said they did replace one of the two crank sensors. This engine uses two crank sensors very close to each other. If my memory serves me correctly, they are 18 degrees apart. If the technician accidentally put the wrong sensor in the wrong location, how would that affect ignition timing? Now, at this point, I'm not really certain ignition timing really is an issue. It just seems a little early, certainly earlier than I am used to seeing on most engines during cranking. Usually during cranking, ignition timing is pretty close to 0, maybe 5 or 10 before top dead center. 20 or more seems a little bit too advanced for me. So maybe this is an issue, maybe it's not. I look at the sensors and try to see if the wire color will show me if they are plugged into the correct location, but these sensors are not easy to access. They're behind the exhaust manifold, and the harness is wrapped in a heat-resistant wrapping, so I really can't see for sure if they are correct or not without getting the vehicle out of the parking lot and onto a lift. Even if they are swapped, I happen to know from experience that this engine will still run. Spark timing seems to be a bit advanced during cranking, but not so much that it should be the cause of the no start. The tech that was working on the vehicle had said to me when I began that it had no spark. I got sidetracked by the broken wire at the cam sensor and the compression issue and have not actually checked for spark yet. Although you have heard me say that you should never take another tech's word for anything, that does not mean you ignore what they have to say. It just means that you verify what they are telling you. He says it has no spark, so I want to make sure that is really the case. Seems odd to me because I've already verified that the ignition modules are indeed being triggered by the PCM when I did the relative compression test with a sync. This vehicle has two ignition module coil pack assemblies. The module and coil pack for cylinders 2, 4, 6, and 8 are on the front valve cover, and the one for 1, 3, 5, and 7 are on the rear. I had connected to the red-white wire when I was doing my relative compression capture to use cylinder 2 as a sink. Since I already know the PCM is triggering the module, I want to verify current draw by the ignition coils. Blue is starter draw, green is the number 2 trigger from the PCM to the ignition control module, and gold is my low amp probe connected to the pink power supply of the ignition module. Forgive me for not zeroing my amp probe, but you can see that even though the PCM is commanding the coils, they are not charging up and firing. They're drawing no current. I checked the pink wire, which did indeed have 12 volts on it, so then I moved the pin to the black-white ground wire, and I got this. I have battery voltage on the ground circuit. I actually double-checked myself and made certain the T-pin did not cross over into the wrong cavity and hit the B+ terminal instead. This is something that I've seen confused techs that don't have an understanding of basic electricity. In situations similar to this, I've heard them say to me, "This ground has a short to B+," which is obviously not possible without melting some wires and likely starting a fire in a case of a wire this large. The battery voltage is not because the ground circuit is shorted to B+, but rather because it is not grounded. The voltage is coming in on the pink wire and powering up the module. The ground wire is supposed to complete the circuit that provides power to the module, but if it is not grounded, you'll be able to see that incoming battery voltage here on the ground circuit. I have a basic electrical course planned where I'll explain this and other common misconceptions that I see frequently, like measuring a battery draw in volts instead of amps. But for now, just know that whenever you measure battery voltage on a ground circuit, it doesn't mean it's shorted to battery voltage, it just means it's not grounded. And whatever it is supposed to be providing ground to is powered up. The diagram we just looked at showed the module is grounded at G103. Service info shows G103 to be on the driver's side below the EGR valve. I can see two black-white wires ending in a red butt connector and not connected to anything. It looks like this has been repaired before but has now broken loose. I grab a jumper wire and connect these two black-white wires to ground. Now the engine starts and runs. Looks like we're missing some ignition coil triggers, but remember, this is only half the engine. I'm only connected to the front ignition module, so cylinders 1, 3, 5, and 7 are not represented here. That's why the ignition coil current looks the way it does. Zoomed in a little more, you can see about 800 millivolts of drop on the ground circuit when the coils charge. While some voltage drop is normal, remember that I still don't have a proper ground. It's just a jumper wire with alligator clips attached to the power steering bracket. When a proper ground repair is completed, the volt drop will probably be a little bit better than this. I didn't let the engine run for more than a few seconds, so I don't know if the misfires were still there or not. I told the shop to fix the bad ground and repair the wiring at the cam sensor connector because I had just twisted them together, They also needed to raise the vehicle and make sure the crank sensors were installed in the correct location. It was a little bit too difficult for me to see in the parking lot on the ground. If they still had misfire issues after warming the engine up and re-oiling the washed out piston rings, they might need to check compression and verify that there really are no compression problems. In the world of mobile diagnostics, having multiple problems with a vehicle is really an everyday occurrence. Too many cooks in the kitchen tends to create more problems than it solves. Well, that brings this episode to a close. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that thumbs up and subscribe button. If you want to help support the channel, you can do so through Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description below to my Patreon page. I'll also put up some of these files on my Google Drive for my Patreon supporters to download. Until next time, thanks everyone, and have a good day.